Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com.
Welcome to the latest episode of Techlandia. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAL, and we're excited to have with us as our guest, Nate Szytel with Next Reason. Nate, welcome.
Hey, Skip. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, as people know, I always like to start these off with a question about your professional journey. I was wondering if you could take a minute just to walk us through how did you end up at Next Reason?
Yeah, sure. So I start off by talking about myself. It's one of my least favorite things to do.
It can
In
only go
fact,
up from here, Nate.
it's true. Sometimes people ask me how to pronounce my last name, which is Szytel. And I often say, first when you ask me to talk about myself, it's a sigh, and then I tell you what a little bit about me. But so
Well,
yeah, I'll get into a succinct version. It was really music that brought me to Portland in 2007. Um, but then once I got here, I sort of soon found myself riding that kind of growing tech wave. I worked as a developer at a few places, started my own consulting practice, and then maybe most notably worked at a now kind of famous Portland tech company called Janrain. And those guys were really the pioneers of social login, and they were attracting big customers like Coca-Cola and Pfizer and Philips and Merck and Procter and Gamble, and the list just kind of went on. So pretty early on, moving to this great city, I found myself making this shift from the world of the arts into tech, which actually felt quite natural. I didn't have a very traditional background, and so it felt almost like a superpower. I could approach problems based on my real human experience instead of a by the book kind of way. And fast forward to 2017, I eventually founded a company called Next Reason because after having worked with so many of those big companies at Janrain, I just kind of heard them trying to solve the same problems over and over around customer identity, because that was the focus. We were a customer identity platform, and they were trying to roll out these global customer identity solutions. But the companies back in that time, this is 2013, 2014, there just weren't a lot of solutions on the market. There was Gigya, there was Janrain, there were a few others. Ping Identity was even around back then. Even Login Radius was. And so Next Reason came about because we just wanted to fill in those gaps. Those small SaaS companies could only do so much, and we could do everything else. We could help them roll out that global market in Singapore. We could help them, um, you know, create a new program for their doctors in Germany. And it just allowed us to sort of um, get into the customer identity space, become experts, and then grow it from there, which was a really exciting journey from then and until now in 2025.
so you mentioned you have a not terribly typical background, a non-traditional background, and that was sort of made it easier, if you will, to kind of transition into tech. And I know what's top of mind right now for a lot of kids coming up, mine included, is with everything changing so quickly around technology right now, especially with generative AI and a host of other things. What advice would you give to someone coming up and looking to get into tech these days? Do you feel like your path is somewhat instructive?
you know, I so my background was always in the service industry. I was always a bartender, which just allowed me to have the most flexible schedule for being in a band, touring around and playing shows and getting shifts covered. And when I started the company, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm never going to hire a tech person. I'm always going to hire service industry people, because I thought service industry people are always thinking on their feet. They are talking face to face with people a lot. There's a lot of soft skills. There's incredible problem management skills that are needing to be thought up on the split second decisions. And it's, what better skills to learn in your life than having to kind of meet all of those things simultaneously? Because the tech stuff, it changes so quickly. It evolves, it changes. So really your aptitude to just adapt and learn and be curious is the thing that's most important. I would say that that's my biggest piece of advice to anyone who's younger, who's thinking about it or has anxieties about, oh, I'm too young or I'm too old or it's moving too fast. It's really the thing that that you cannot really teach is just your curiosity. How what are these problems? How could this be made better? What I'm interested in this. That interest needs to come from somewhere deep, I think.
That's great. Now, I'm imagining that in your current role, you have tons of opportunities to learn a lot about your customers and, help tailor solutions to their needs. And so as we're thinking about um, the customer identity services offered by Next Reason, I was wondering if you could take a little bit of time to kind of describe, who are the types of customers that you're working with? And also, maybe in doing so, describe a little bit about the different services that you offer to each.
Yeah, sure. So in general, and by the way, for those of you listening who maybe don't, I'm saying the word identity a lot, um, but at the most basic level, that's login and registration, and I'm putting the C on front of it, which is customer consumer. So customer login and registration means if you have a business that needs to offer login and registration to your customers, then that's where we help. That's where we build solutions for. Ostensibly, it seems pretty straightforward. But then as you go a layer down, you're helping securely collect and manage this identity information. Where is it stored? How is it encrypted? You're trying to create seamless login and personalized experiences. And so, especially now that we have multiple devices and et cetera, et cetera. So it just becomes pretty complex pretty quick. That's really the crux of what we hear from our customers. So we tend to work with pretty large enterprises. This is pharmaceutical companies, energy companies, consumer packaged goods, and they not only have very simple needs like I just described, but the umbrella that sits over the top of them is pretty complicated. So, for example, and I can talk about this company because they're not a customer of ours, Johnson and Johnson. They might have, however many different brands distributed globally, and one of those brands, let's say Band-Aid, might have a set of initiatives in certain countries, but those countries might all act independently. They have their own marketing teams and their own app development teams, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just one brand in one company under this huge umbrella. And so the thing that we help most of the time when it comes to large implementations like this is how to give those brands the flexibility they need to offer really easy login experiences, but be under this unified umbrella to keep things secure and compliant and all of those things.
Excellent. No, that was definitely a helpful overview. And as we think about like the complexity with data privacy regimes and the EU with GDPR versus the US, I imagine that's also something that's top of mind for
Yeah.
many of the customers.
Yeah, that's right. So, Europe has always been a bit ahead of the curve in that regard. GDPR came out of Europe, and that's because that annoying little cookie banner that we all get when we visit a website, accept the cookies or don't. That was in place, I think 2 or 3 years before we had it in the States. In Europe, they really led the charge there, and so they've always been a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to implementing features that are in protection of our own data and privacy and security, which coincidentally is part of the reason why Next Reason really got legs early on, is because Europe not only set the curve from a compliance and privacy standpoint, but they also set the curve with working with smaller, more boutique companies like mine, because we're able to provide just a more specialized service. And so it sounds odd that this little Portland company was working with such big, brands, but the reality is that those big brands weren't having much success working with really, really big system integration providers. per se, and I'm talking in generalities here, but that's really what gave us a lot of the early on when we were talking with those customers. They really liked the fact that we were very hands-on and we were small enough that we could really understand their business because everyone's slightly different.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's one of those cases counterintuitively. You don't often hear about smaller companies thriving in heavily complex, heavily regulated environments. But here you're living proof.
That's right. Here I am. Here I am, still standing so far. And by the way, we are Next Reason has been completely bootstrapped from day one. It has been a slow, long journey. Let me tell you. So we have we have a team in Portland, but we also have a team in Brazil, and we have the team in the Philippines, which allows us to provide that global service. You know, we maintain our SOC 2 Type 2, and we maintain ITIL certifications and all of that stuff. But we've sort of been able to roll out these services to our global team so that we can service those bigger companies.
And I'm wondering, in the conversations you're having with customers and prospective customers, how how big of an issue is the cybersecurity piece of it becoming right now? And I'm wondering what is kind of top of mind as you see it in that space.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, some of these topics are just rabbit holes that we could go down. The
I know.
the I and the thing about customer identity that's so interesting is it's tied to both sides of the house. It's
Mhm.
tied directly to customer revenue, which we can talk about in a little bit. When it comes to cybersecurity and things that are top of mind for bigger companies, data breaches, I mean, there was a report recently that said data breaches can cost companies upwards of 5 million bucks on average. So that is across mid-market SMB and enterprise. If you have a data breach, you're spending money. You're spending a lot of it, but that's not even including brand reputation and downtime and lost revenue through those types of things as well. So there's obviously just a direct correlation between having a more secure authentication provider and lost revenue. Now, and there's always a balance, right? So within companies, you have this constant battle between the IT department, who wants people to set passwords that are about 50 characters long, and they want everyone's account to just be secured, and they have to jump through all of these hoops to get into their account. And then you have the marketing department, who have the real business objectives. They have to acquire so many customers, and they have to give them access to great products and services, and they've got, really tangible goals that they have to meet. And those two things are constantly in a battle with one another. So, these days, especially with all of the great tooling that's coming out around frictionless authentication, passwordless options, pass keys, for examples, and of course, I'm going to say it, AI, you have just a lot more options for balancing those two sides of the house. So you can keep users secure, but you can also offer them very frictionless, passwordless authentication experiences, which has been a big revelation in the last few years. And it's why the industry is blowing up even more now than it ever has.
Imagine there's quite a few cultural and other like preference differences across different geographies. And I'm wondering, is that the case? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, so there was a company that we worked for, an energy provider, and they had a set of fleet truck drivers in rural India. Um, and those truck drivers, they don't have the latest phone. They don't have oftentimes access to fast data. Maybe they have a cell signal, and that's about it. So within those regions, and especially in South Pacific and Asia South Pacific area, it's really SMS based. You ditch the password altogether. No one likes passwords, by the way. Can I just say that? They're the worst. They're not secure. No one there is not one person who says, "Ah, they're great. I love them." They're just not. We need to move away from them. And some of those
Cyber criminals love passwords.
they do. They do. 'Cause the password is something that but authentication needs to be something that you have, like your device, and something you are, like, "You're that person. This is my identity," right? I get access to those things. But yeah, to your point, um, the some markets are just really interested in so in China, for example, the OTP, which is the one-time password, is the most prevalent way to access an application. And what that means is you never set a password. You only get texted a PIN once you need to authenticate, and that PIN is valid for whatever 5 minutes. Of course, your application session can be expanded, but that password that you get is very short-lived. That's really what they do there, and that is the easiest way, and they've built tooling around that. You know, you have really slick ways from your WhatsApp or your WeChat to copy a PIN and authenticate into those.
And so is in your mind China kind of leading in this area with kind of novel authentication and identity management, or is there another case study out there that you think is particularly interesting?
I wanted to see how long we would go, Skip, without saying the word Estonia in this podcast,
I
but
swear we did not talk about that beforehand.
we might have colloquially in the past, just you and I. But yeah, there is this great digital. I mean, how much should we go into this? There's this great digital revolution, right, that happened many years ago within Estonia, where they digitized all of their social services, and even beyond that, as Skip can go into great length to tell everyone. But I think that they are really leading the charge when it comes to, um, you know, how you decentralize your ID. So it isn't necessarily about the method, it's really about what happens behind the scenes, because the methods that exist to get people to authenticate into your mobile device or your computer or your iPad or whatever it is, they exist. There's biometrics now, there's pins, there is magic links. You know, you can get a link emailed to you that you click on. There's lots of ways that you can authenticate securely into something. But the thing that's correct for that right context at that right moment and is easiest for that group of people is the thing that's hard. And that's where Estonia has done really well is they've figured out that like, oh, we're going to make this as easy as possible for the the Luddites, the people they are not up to date with the fanciest thing. So I think that's the big takeaway here is that you don't have to be very technologically ahead of the curve to implement really forward thinking and seamless customer identity solutions.
That's a really astute observation. As we look at like the company itself, you mentioned earlier that you're essentially bootstrap, self-funded. Um, what keeps you up at night right now in terms of future growth opportunities?
Right. So th- there is a lot of great customer identity platforms on the market today, and I'm talking about the Auth Zeros, the Strivosity is a new one. They're great front egg. There's the ForgeRock, which got acquired by Ping Identity, and now is called Ping One Advanced Identity Cloud. Um, and so there's a lot of great customer identity platforms on the market. And the reason why they've done so well and they're so great is because implementing these systems is hard. By the way, this is a long way around your question, which I'm going to try to get to really quickly. The reason why they've done so well and why those platforms are so great is because implementing a secure customer identity solution is just hard. It's hard to it's hard to build these flows that are easy for users and are secure and are deployed in different regions, et cetera. And so these companies have done well because they've figured out how to enable the developers to implement them within the apps. They're very developer centric. And that's been a major hurdle in the past. It's just they've notoriously been difficult to develop. Now, with these platforms, you can drop in solutions. You can have developers download open source libraries, and they're enabled to take the charge to implement these really great flexible solutions. I think we've crested this this mountain of customer identity is hard. Now it's easier. The technology is there, it exists. But now we need to take customer identity from the IT departments and we need to move it back into the business departments, because what happens as soon as a business says, hey, I want to change our theme, our color scheme, which Tim and I were just talking about, our layout. We want to make it so that in this market there is no registration process. It's a simple sign in. We want to make it so that if you're in a secure network, then you don't have to authenticate. That's something we can do now. The issue with that is as soon as the business wants to make those decisions, they have to, guess what, contact the IT department. So all of these very critical business objectives when it comes to revenue and growing user loyalty, fan base subscriptions, your e-commerce model, et cetera, is now directly tied to your IT department. And that needs to move back into the business, which has been a big focus of what we've worked on at Next Reason, which is how do you then enable the business, the non-technical users, to take control back of this thing now that it can be secure and it can be easy to implement. It can't be the technical departments that are sort of still managing it. I think that's one transition that has been especially difficult for some companies to adjust to, because that the budget, the initiatives, all of that still lies within the security peripheral, and that sort of needs to be moved. Even though that seems counterintuitive, it needs to be moved back into the business.
That makes sense. And based on something you said earlier about, how it also not only is about security, but on the flip side, driving revenue through a seamless experience. And, it's like you can't really define what a seamless experience is if you always have your risk and security hat on,
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I'm wondering, for large companies, that makes a lot of sense. What would your advice be to startups that are just now building their solutions? How do they build with identity in mind from day one? Is it more possible now than it's ever been?
yeah. I mean, so admittedly, I would say that early on, the real value of implementing customer identity was a little bit unknown. It was just kind of too soon to tell. But now in 2025, it's just very clear that something like 50% of users can abandon a sign up flow if it's too complex or it requires too much information. You can, if you streamline your login experiences, your customer acquisition experiences, you can increase conversion rates by 25, 30%, 35% for new customers. So this is not just for big companies. This is something that people need to be considering from day one. How do I streamline how customers get from an unknown to a known, and what does that journey look like? And it isn't just what does that journey look like, it's what does it look like across all of the different contexts. And so for a startup, there are so many solutions that exist out there. This is everything. There are emerging identity platforms on the market that are fairly inexpensive and easy to implement. If you're a startup, it might be as simple as dropping in, one of their widgets that are configurable. The pricing models are pretty inexpensive. It has a lot to do with monthly active users or MAUs. That would be the place to start. And then, of course, companies like Next Reason. I keep focusing on these big companies, but we work with a lot of small companies too, and that's key, because when it comes to having experts who can come in and sort of assess what your use case is and understand what it is you're trying to achieve, getting from the technical unknown bits into achieving a business objective is what we are experts at. And so we can come in and do an assessment, do a health check, do a roadmap and recommendation, et cetera, and go from there.
And I'm wondering, as we kind of near our time, the end of our time together, what are some resources, either books, podcasts you're listening to that you might recommend to our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just because I'm a tech entrepreneur, I just love the SaaS podcast so much. Um, they have constantly are just talking with founders of startups, often bootstrapped. And what's so interesting about them is not only do they talk about the latest trends, especially in AI and agentic AI, which is a huge topic with customer identity, but
Okay.
you get to learn just about new companies and who exists, and what challenges they're facing. I find that incredibly interesting. And then from a book perspective, maybe a year ago, I'm a big fiction reader, but from a business perspective, and maybe I'm a little late to the game, but I recently read Measure What Matters to be able to set the OKRs within my own business. And that's been a game changer of just simplifying and focusing on what actually matters to the business. And for us, it's very customer centric, it's very simple top level objectives that have helped us grow.
Excellent. Great recommendations. And any words of wisdom as we wrap up?
Oh man, no, I think this was just a great talk, Skip. I really appreciate you having me on. And if there's one thing I can leave people with, it's that it doesn't matter how big or small the business is. Um, 15 to 25% of your revenue could be influenced by customer identity in some way. So, and that's even greater if you're in a subscription-based service or an e-commerce service or a financial service. And so that's really an area of focus. And if you'd like, please reach out to me. My name's Nate. Find me on LinkedIn. Of course, you can find my partner's website through the partner portal on the TAO website as well.
Excellent. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
That's a wrap on this episode of Techlandia, the podcast, where innovation meets insight. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow us, leave a review, and share it with your fellow tech explorers. You can follow us at techoregon.org for updates and more tech-fueled content. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building the future.